Hi, hello English readers. Welcome everyone. Welcome to this live read along of Mrs Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. And I'm Lydie Bureau and I'm an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club. Sorry, it's a little bit late today, in which I host live readings of adaptations of classics of English literature or contemporary novels. And I mainly prioritize novels that are written by women. We also, in the book club, we meet the members once a week, in which we talk about the chapters that we have read over the week. And we also talk about books and learning English as well in general. And today we are going to read the fourth section of this novel because it's a very specific novel. There are no chapters. The story is happening in one day, and it's written as one text, basically, one block. So we are reading pages 38 to 45 today. And if you want to know more about Virginia Woolf and Mrs Dalloway, I invite you to listen to the podcast episode that I have recorded live last week. It's called An Introduction to Virginia Woolf and Mrs Dalloway. And the live podcast will be available next Thursday. So be ready to listen to it if you are interested. Okay, so hello guys. Thank you for joining. Thank you, thank you. I hope you had a beautiful day. It was a sunny day today, and that you're not too tired. It is 6:45 in France and in Central European time. So I hope you still have some energy to get focused on the novel. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick recap on the chapter, on the pages, on the pages that we have read yesterday. So yesterday, it was quite a long chunk. It was mainly the scene between, the conversation between Clarissa, one of the main character, and Peter Walsh, which is also one of the main character, who are having a chat. And Peter Walsh is visiting his friend Clarissa, who lives in London. He is back from India. It's been 5 years that he's been away in India, and he's back to London, and he's back for a very specific purpose. He is in love with a married woman, and he wants to find a way to, as we understand, to get a divorce, or how to do to get divorced. So he's in London to see his lawyer or lawyers and discuss that. And Clarissa, at first, before she learns about the real reason why he's in London, she is very excited to see him. So she's asking a lot about their memory when they were young, because they used to be, they grew up at her, they grew up together when she was still living in her childhood house, but called Burton. And it's a country house. And she is kind of nostalgic about this time. And they both kind of remind each other these moments together. And we are navigating between Clarissa's thoughts and Peter Walsh's thoughts as well. And it can be a little bit confusing at times because it goes from indirect speech to direct speech, in which Clarissa is thinking about an event in the past, and at the same time she's asking what about him, and what about his life, and that is very much intertwined in the sentences and the paragraphs. So you have to keep up with the narrative. And there are also information about the present. For example, there is a moment where they're talking, Peter is mentioning the fact that Clarissa's dad never liked him, and Clarissa is telling him that he actually never didn't like anyone, even her other friends. And in brackets, you have Clarissa saying to herself, yeah, that well, actually, when he died, you didn't really send any condolences messages, any message of condolences when he died. So it's kind of that really represent what is the concept of stream of consciousness, or the writing style of stream of consciousness, which is particular to that novel, because we are jumping from one thought to another. And one also, she's speaking about a topic, and at the same time thinking about another aspect of the conversation, and you kind of have to keep track with all those ideas. And that reflects actually what we feel, how our brain works when we are having a conversation. It often happens to us when we are talking about something, and then suddenly, oh, by the way, it actually gives me the I'm thinking about that, or it really triggers other thoughts at the same time. And at some point, sometimes you don't even listen to the conversation anymore, because you are now thinking about something else. So it's kind of disturbing sometimes. But the interesting aspect of Virginia Woolf in this novel as well is that Virginia Woolf experienced mental illness, and she had she would hear voices in her head because she was sick, mentally sick. So it's at a higher level even. So this novel really reflects that that personal experience to the higher level. Yeah. Okay, so let's start the reading of this a new part of the text. Okay. Remember my party? Okay, and when Peter Walsh leaves the house, she's inviting him to her party, because remember, she's attending this dinner party tonight, and she is shouting, "Remember my party, make sure that you're going to be here. You're going to be there. Remember my party, said Peter Walsh as he stepped down the street, speaking to himself in time with the echo of Big Ben. It was still early, only 11:30. So remember, yeah, we're still in the morning of that day. Oh, Clarissa's parties, he thought. Why does she give these parties? Not that he blamed her. Only one person in the world could be as he was, in love. And there he was, this fortunate man, reflected in a shop window, all India behind him, really in love for the first time in his life. So the woman who is in love, he is in love with, lives in India. Clarissa had grown hard, he thought, and a little sentimental. The way she said, "Here is my Elizabeth," annoyed him. Why not just "Here's Elizabeth"? It was insincere. And Elizabeth didn't like it either, for he understood young people. He liked them. There was always something cold in Clarissa, he thought. She had always had, even as a girl, a kind of shyness, which in middle age becomes ordinariness. And then it's all over, he thought. Had he annoyed her by visiting at that time? He wondered. Then he felt suddenly embarrassed at having been such a fool, crying, telling her everything as usual. As a cloud crosses the sun, silence falls on London and falls on the mind. There we stop. There we stand. It is only habit that keeps us going. Peter Walsh said to himself, pausing, feeling empty inside. He stood there thinking, Clarissa refused me. The bells of St. Margaret's Church rang out 2 minutes late, as usual. Clarissa has been ill, he thought. It was her heart, he remembered. And as the final bell suddenly rang out, loud and sullen, for death that surprised in the middle of life, he thought of Clarissa, falling where she stood. No, no, he cried. She's not dead. I'm not old, he cried, marching up Whitehall, as if his future stretched before him there, forceful, unending. He was not old or fixed or dried up in the least. He did not care a bit about what the Dalloways and the Whitbreads, and I'm not sure about the pronunciation here. Whitbreads, I would say. And their thought of people said about him. True, he had not finished his studies at Oxford University. He had rejected their kind of politics, and he had failed in some ways. But the future lies in the hands of young men like himself, as he had been 30 years now. With their love of ideas, always reading science, reading philosophy. A noise came from behind, a regular thudding sound. Boys in uniform, carrying guns, marched with their heads high, with their eyes ahead of them, their arms stiff, on their solemn progress away from the cenotaph. Cenotaph. From the cenotaph. They reached him, marched on past him to Trafalgar Square and disappeared. Nobody yet knew he was in London except Clarissa. And the strangeness of standing alone, alive, unknown, at 11:30 in Trafalgar Square flooded over him. His mind emptied, and he felt a sudden, powerful joy. He had escaped. He was completely free. I haven't felt so young for years, thought Peter, feeling like a child who runs outdoors. A young woman in a long cloak came walking across Trafalgar Square. She's extraordinarily beautiful, Peter thought, starting to follow her. Even with her back turned, she seemed to choose him. You, she said, with her white gloves and her long thin cloak, which blew out a little in the wind, like open arms that would offer comfort. She waited at the edge of the pavement. She was not rich, like Clarissa, but there was a dignity about her. She crossed the road. He followed. The last thing he wanted was to make her embarrassed. But if she stopped, he would say, "Come and have an ice cream." And she would answer simply, "Oh, yes." Other people came between them. He kept following. He was a wild, romantic adventurer. On and on she went, across Piccadilly Circus, up Regent Street, across Oxford Street, turning down one of the little side streets. Finally, she stopped at a house, opened her bag, and with one look in his direction, but not at him, put her key in the door and was gone. It was over. Well, I've had fun. I've had my fun, he thought. It was over, and half imagined, as he knew very well. He had invented her, as one invents most of life, he thought. Clarissa's voice sang in his ears, "Remember my party, remember my party." He turned and went up the street, thinking he would find somewhere to sit, till it was time for the lawyers. Where should he go? It didn't matter, he thought, for it was still very early. Up the street then, towards Regent's Park. It was a splendid morning. It was a splendid morning, too, and London was a splendid achievement in its way. The doctors, office workers, and purposeful women, all going about their business, seemed to him wholly admirable and good. He had walked in Regent's Park as a child. It is odd, he thought, how the past keeps coming back to him. The result of seeing Clarissa, perhaps, for women live much more in the past than we do. We men, he thought, and attach themselves to places. Here he was in Regent's Park, and yes, he remembered it. He would find an empty seat in the shade and smoke. He did not want to be disturbed by people asking him the time. There was a long seat with an old grey-haired nanny and a baby asleep in a pram beside her. He would sit at the far end of that seat. She's an odd-looking girl, he thought, suddenly remembering Elizabeth coming into the room and standing by her mother. She's quite grown up now, no more than 18, and handsome rather than pretty. She probably doesn't get on with Clarissa. I shall try and speak with Elizabeth alone tonight, he thought. He watched the smoke from his cigarette slowly making odd shapes and in the air and gradually fading away. Suddenly, he closed his eyes, raised his hand with great effort, and threw away the heavy end of his cigarettes. His mind emptied, shutting out the children's voices, people passing, rising and falling traffic. Down, down he fell into sleep, while beside him on the hot seat, the old nanny watched over the baby sleeping in its pram and the baby's little sister playing on the grass. Peter Walsh woke suddenly. Good heavens, he said to himself out loud. He had been dreaming of some scene, some room, some past, which gradually became clearer. It was at Burton that summer, when he was so much in love with Clarissa. There were a lot of people there, sitting round at a table, talking and laughing. He remembered Sally Seton, Clarissa's dearest friend, who was always at Burton. He gave Sally cigarettes, which she smoked in her room, and Clarissa's father disliked them both equally, which made them great friends. He remembered a terrible quarrel with Clarissa about a neighbor who had married a woman who had once been his servant. Did they know that the wife had had a baby before they were married? Sally Seton said. Clarissa had been greatly offended. She would never speak to the woman again. Peter did not blame her for minding. Girls brought up in the way she had been knew nothing. It was her manner that annoyed him. Hard, cold, superior. She knew that he criticized her, even without speaking. She got up and went off alone. As soon as she shut the door, he felt deeply unhappy. It all seemed useless. Going on, being in love, going on quarreling, going on forgiving each other and being friends again. It was an awful evening, and he couldn't speak to her about it. There were always people about, and she cried on as if nothing had happened. That was the worst part of her, this coldness, this woodenness, which he had felt again this morning. Yet, heaven knows he loved her. He had gone into dinner late and sat down by Aunt Elena, old Miss Parry, and fierce old lady, but who was kind to him. And then, halfway through dinner, he made himself look across at Clarissa for the first time. She was talking to a young man on her right, and he suddenly said to himself, she was talking to a young man and her at her right, and he suddenly said to himself, she will marry that man. He didn't even know that man's name, for it was that afternoon, of course, that Richard Dalloway had come to Burton. Later, Clarissa had come up to him with her perfect manners and spoke to him as if they had never met before, which made him angry. The perfect hostess, he said to her, and so how it hurt her. But he meant to hurt her. After seeing her with Dalloway, then she left him, and he had a feeling that they were all gathered together against him, laughing and talking behind his back. He stood by Aunt Elena, talking about wild flowers. Again, the flowers is very present in the novel. Never had he suffered so much. People began going out of the room, he heard them talking about fetching clocks because it was cold on the water. They were going boating on the lake by moonlight. One of Sally's mad ideas, and they all went out. He was left quite alone. Don't you want to go with them? Said Aunt Elena. She had guessed, and he turned round, and there was Clarissa again. She had come back to fetch him. He was overcome by her goodness. Come along, Clarissa said. They're waiting. They walked down to the lake. He had never felt so happy in the whole of his life. Without even speaking, they were friends again. He had 20 minutes of perfect happiness. And all the time he knew perfectly well that Dalloway was falling in love with her, that she was falling in love with Dalloway. But it didn't seem to matter. Nothing mattered. They sat on the ground and talked. They went in and out of each other's minds without any effort. And then, in a second, it was over. He said to himself as they were getting into the boat, she will marry that man. He knew that he was foolish. He asked impossible things of Clarissa. He made terrible scenes. She would have accepted him, perhaps, if he had been less foolish. Sally thought so. It was an extraordinary summer. The awkward conversations with Clarissa's father, Justin Parry, at breakfast. Aunt Elena being fierce but kind. Sally taking him off for talks in the vegetable garden. Clarissa in bed with headaches. The final terrible scene, which he believed mattered more than anything in the whole of his life, happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon of a very hot day. It had started at lunch when Sally made a silly joke about Dalloway, and Clarissa was suddenly annoyed. That was all, but it was exactly as if she had said to him, I'm only amusing myself with you. I have an understanding with Richard Dalloway. He had not slept for nights. It's got to be finished one day or the other, he said to himself. He sent a note to Clarissa by Sally, asking her to meet him by the fountain at 3. Something very important has happened, he wrote at the end of it. She came early, and they stood with the fountain between them. She did not move. Tell me the truth, he kept on saying. He felt as if his head would explode. She seemed turned to stone. Tell me the truth, he repeated. She was like iron, like hard stone. And when she said, this is the end, after he had spoken for a while, with tears running down his cheeks, it was as if she had hit him. She turned, she left him, she went away. Clarissa, he cried, Clarissa! But she never came back. It was over. He went away that night and never returned. It was awful, he cried, awful, awful. Still the sun was hot. Still one got over things. Still life had a way of adding day to day, he thought, yawning and beginning to take notice of ridge and spark in the sunshine. The little girl who had been showing pretty stones to her old nanny at the other end of the seat ran off straight into a lady's leg. Peter Walsh laughed out loud. And that's the end of this section. Well, it is such a beautiful and sad story for Peter Walsh. Once again, a sad story. Yeah, he is reminiscing about their summer at Burton and the day she broke up with him. And it's so sad. Yeah. Hi, Tian. Well, hi. Thank you for joining this live. I hope you enjoyed learning about more about Peter Walsh's thoughts, because that section is mainly about Peter Walsh and his perspective on their summer and his own perspective on Clarissa, how he sees her. We have more understanding of his own view about her, and the fact that he was sadly deeply in love with her. It's sad but very informative. Yeah. Yes, indeed. And how it's interesting to see how lucid he was, how very aware of the fact that that summer when she met, when they met Richard Dalloway, he knew right away that she would marry him and not, she would marry Richard Dalloway and not him. Because I guess so that they were dating, and this is what we understand as when she said, "This is over, this is the end." So straight away, Peter Walsh understands that he's not in the same, is not playing on the same field, basically, and that Richard Dalloway is not on the same league, let's say. He's and he is also reflecting on his own behavior towards Clarissa, the fact that he's saying, oh, he was making scenes all the time, probably scenes about maybe jealousy or I don't know, but I guess he was so in love with her that any little annoyances or anything that he didn't like, he would make a scene. And he knows, he realizes that that's what's gonna make him lose her. Yeah. So yeah, I let you reflect on this chapter and kind of make up your own understanding of this character, and also how much it says about Virginia Woolf as well, what is she's trying to say here. So yeah, I'm gonna leave you here now. I hope you enjoyed this live reading, and thank you again for joining and for joining the live, and thank you so much for watching the video on replay. And make sure that you subscribe to the book club again to be part of this beautiful community of book lovers at Lydia's Book Club, and be part of this literary journey and have the chance to practice your English. Yeah. So I wish you a beautiful end of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow for the live reading of the section 5, and it's going to be the last reading of the week. Bye bye. Thank you again.